What you're looking at is one of the earliest weights that we have in the collection of the Royal Ontario Museum, and it doesn't look like the paperweight that we know today because it doesn't have the dome of glass. These are Italian, and they were first made in the 1830s and 1840s, and when they were shown at the exhibitions, they were exceedingly popular, and a lot of people thought that they were wonderful. But it was a Frenchman, an unknown glassmaker, who decided that maybe they would even look better with a dome of glass on top of them. And of course, the dome of glass magnifies anything inside and makes it much larger. So these kind of things became very popular, but it was the French in the 1840s and 50s who started to dominate the market with their paperweights. Later on, the Americans got into the act. They started making paperweights in the 1850s to the 1870s, and even later. Their major ones are actually in the 1870s and 80s, but then that died, and the English started to make more weights in the early 20th century, and then that slowly died out. And it wasn't until the 1950s and 60s when two men in two different countries, Charles Casian in the United States and Paul Isart in Scotland, decided that they would start to make paperweights. And that started the studio movement of paperweight making, which we still have today, which is basically dominated by the Americans because of their flame work techniques, but also we have a number of Canadians now that are getting into the act of creating paperweights. So we're starting a new trend in this civilization. The ROM has been very fortunate in the donation of weights. In fact, we had two major donors. One of them was Mrs. Alice Baldwin Hall, who collected the classical paperweights, the French paperweights of the 1840s and 50s. The other was J.H. Howson Brocklebank, who collected contemporary weights. And as each one gave us their collections, the two collections fitted together perfectly because one was more 19th century and the other was 20th century. Mr. Brocklebank especially liked the modern weights because he could meet the artists themselves. Mrs. Hall had no chance of doing that. The artists of her weights had long since died. But both were on the cutting edge of collecting because there were so few books or bits of information at that time, both in the 1950s and 60s when Mrs. Hall was collecting and later on with Mr. Brocklebank collecting. So not only their information that they worked out themselves, but also the information of their own minds. The quality of choosing different things was very important.